Welcome to Built to Finish. I'm your host, Stephen Pivnik. Join me each week as we explore the journeys of audacious goal setters. This includes experienced founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing pivotal moments that propel their success. We'll also be talking with endurance athletes who push the limits of physical and mental ability. This show is brought to you by Accresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services to help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Built to Finish podcast. My guest today works with high-performing entrepreneurs and executives, not just after a liquidity event, but years before it ever happens. He helps clients structure their financial lives early so that when the exit does come, they're not reacting, they're executing a plan. He operates at the intersection of wealth strategy, tax efficiency, and long-term financial architecture, helping founders protect what they're building, eliminate hidden inefficiencies, and ultimately maximize what they keep, not just what they make. This is going to be a powerful conversation if you're scaling, thinking about liquidity, or even just want to be more intentional about your wealth is being built today. Jim Stryker, welcome to the show.
Stephen, man, thank you for having me. It's an honor. Looking forward to getting after this today.
My pleasure. I mean, finances and wealth management is such an important topic on founders' minds. And there's just so much information and, more importantly, misinformation out there. So I'm sure you'll be able to set the record straight today.
Yeah, I'll do my best. This is definitely a misunderstood space for sure. So let's have a great conversation and get after it.
Yeah, let's jump into it. So I think most founders think about wealth after a liquidity event. But what's the real cost of waiting that long?
You know, from my perspective, planning the exit usually is best done when you plan at the beginning, and here's why. Because when you plan after the fact, it's a little late to plan the taxes. And let's face it, the exit's a liquidity event, and it's a significant liquidity event. And I think having a lot of clarity before the exit is planned is best in terms of understanding where someone's present financial position is, and that's where we do a lot of the planning. I think it helps a lot of people from what I've found, particularly ones that are nearing an exit within, call it 24, 36 months out. In that it gives us time to really plan, and it gets them really clear on what the number is, right? And so that way we have some time to maneuver some assets and start to look at things from a personal balance sheet perspective, not the company balance sheet perspective, and see how the liquidity event is actually going to impact the founder's personal net worth and what the tax implications are going to be and all of that.
Okay. So way before liquidity, I mean, obviously a lot of people do financial planning, or at least should be doing financial planning. What do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that people make?
Primarily, it's around taxes for sure, and also being in products. I mean, look, growing money in a taxable environment, we all know is the most expensive place to grow money, right? And so growing money in even in tax deferred, one step down can be really expensive, particularly, if you're making a whole bunch or you have taxes that eventually you're going to be paying, in tax deferred accounts. But there also are tax free accounts above and beyond Roth that are great places to store money, to grow money, and access money. And so a lot of the times we utilize executive bonus plans and a lot of goal programs, growth-only automated programs inside the organization far before the liquidity event is going to happen to offset some otherwise payable income tax dollars for the founder, also for the organization that stays on the balance sheet, and as well as when the exit does occur. So a lot of planning, upfront around, the tax impact. Failure to plan really, in the tax, aspect can have an impact on Social Security, Medicare, IRMA, all kinds of things, down the road. Making a tremendous income and having a great liquidity event is fantastic, but it also creates a silent partner, if you will, in Uncle Sam and your journey in the long haul.
Yes, I'm painfully aware of that wonderful relative we all share, and
he's hungry.
Requirements to take a nice chunk of that pie.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. We've had some significant exits where we've improved founders' financial situations, net tens of millions of dollars from planning and not planning. So it can be significant.
No, that's a huge swing. I mean, people are literally leaving millions of dollars, not so
Yep.
much on the table. In addition to leaving them on the table, they're leaving them with our favorite relative, Uncle Sam, if not planned
Right.
for properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how about post exit? So obviously there's a lot of, tax issues, pre-exit and just in wealth planning in general. But what have you seen as far as like post exit? Are there any like, big mistakes that you've seen founders make post exit that destroy wealth?
Yeah, a lot of post exit opportunities, I would say. People don't know what they don't know, and so sometimes that mistake is just showing up as a result of just not knowing. And it's a complex world out there as it relates to weaving a short-term and long-term overall financial objective into a comprehensive strategy in a fast-paced world today that's changing at the speed of light today. I mean, every day is a new day in terms of how fast, things are moving. But I like to keep things really, really simple, for people. And that is safety first of principal and assets, liquidity second, and then rate of return third, and then look at the tax implications thereafter. But I kind of do things in that order, safety, liquidity, and rate of return. We just sort of live by a philosophy around wealth management and people's money that it's better to have the return of your money instead of the return on it. So you've worked your whole life to build this company and grind it out to get it to sell, and you have this liquidity event. You fed your silent partner, Uncle Sam, and now there's all this, resources and all this money sitting there,
Hmm.
and we want to make sure that it's not you don't lose it, right? So preserve it, protect it, and make sure that it's woven into the overall estate as well. It's really, really important to have the estate planning, in place and protect the family and yourself from income protection scenarios, asset protection scenarios, estate planning scenarios, so that you don't invite your partner or your person that the company that you just fed back into your life, right? So Uncle Sam has an insatiable appetite for more and more and more.
Yes, yes, he does. So I hear the word estate planning all the
Yeah,
time, and I think
yeah.
it's a very misunderstood word. Can you get into like a little bit of detail on what does estate planning really mean to founders?
Yeah, I mean, estate planning is really can be summarized. It's complicated. Don't get me wrong, but it's also very simple in the same token, and that is that there is an estate plan. It's usually the state's plan for your assets and your wealth, or it's your estate's plan. But either way, there's a plan, right? And so if you fail to plan, the state has the plan, and it's called probate, and it's called litigation, and it's called notification, and it's called public disclosure, and it's a long, drawn out, expensive process. It's very, very disruptive, to the family, to the loved ones that are left behind, and also opens up, to some lawsuits and things of that nature that you want to avoid. But most importantly, I think it's one of those things that just wealth left to the family without accountability and responsibility can become a burden. And so it's actually a phenomenal opportunity to make sure that you get to leave behind the money to your family the way that you want it to be left behind, and
Hmm.
it can go do what it was designed to do based off of what your wishes are. If you don't tell the state what your wishes are, they will try and determine what your wishes are, and they'll try and determine that with a lot of extra legal fees, a lot of extra assumptions, and they'll draw that out, as much as possible. But also, depending on the event, Stephen, there's a threshold, whether it's 23 million, for the family, or 14 at
Hmm.
the time we're recording this. It's ever changing, and then at the state level as well, you could invite your partner, Uncle Sam, back into the transfer of your wealth. And so it's very important to especially if you have excess resources, to sit down with an estate planning professional and look at how your estate is impacted while you're here, and then how your estate's going to be impacted, in the event that you're not here. And so really there's two components. There's the living will aspect of your estate planning, and then there's the actual trust, aspect of your
Hmm.
estate planning, and whether you want to do revocable or irrevocable. I mean, there's lots of things that can be discussed there, whether it needs to be an ILIT or, other mechanisms. There's lots to talk about there, but it's one of those things that you got to get done. It's like going to the doctor and getting a root canal or a double one. It's not something that everybody looks forward to, but it's something that definitely is very important. And I will say this: if structured the right way, you can eliminate your Uncle Sam coming back into your overall state, regardless of the size of the estate. If you meet with the the right people. So all of the wealth that you've worked so hard for your entire life can be transferred to your family in multiple generations without the impact of taxation. And you can keep the family members at bay. So there's not a whole lot of fighting and squabbling and all of that, right?
I love your definition of estate planning. The state has a plan, unless you have your own. So I'm going to use
Yeah,
that going forward.
yeah, yeah, they do.
I love that. So you mentioned earlier that a lot of people just don't know what they don't know. On that front, what questions should folks be asking from their financial advisor that they typically don't?
Yeah, I think one of the great things to sit down with your financial advisor and look at is something we call the spending game, and it's a fun scenario we typically do in the second half of our planning process. And that is around the future position. And so we all have a present financial position where we are earning money and we've accumulated money in assets, and we have maybe some liabilities and some outflows, but it's basically a present, snapshot of kind of where we're at. And for the purpose of that is I think we all have the desire at some moment, in our life to have employment become optional, right? And so, especially
Hmm.
for founders that are looking for an exit, there's a different passion. There's maybe a different company. Something else in life that you want to dedicate your time and energy to, whether that's travel, spending time with the kids or grandkids, whatever it is, for everybody. But I think very few financial advisors, today really sit down with clients and financially model what the spending down of assets have been accumulated really look like. I think a lot of people just kind of rely on the 4% rule or the 3% rule, or just sort of make an assumption that, hey, the market generally, kind of goes up. And if you could take an average that's and longer term, 25, 30, 40-year average, the market generally always goes up. And you're just going to be able to live off the interest. The principal is going to be there for you, and you're going to be okay. And man, when you do some financial modeling, and you really say, hey, I want you to really look at what I've accumulated and I have no income coming in. How long is this money going to last? And run some scenarios there. And it's astonishing what you'll find out when you look at wealth for all of us, at the impact of taxation and inflation, sequence of returns, market risk fees, and all of the things that are silently kind of eroding, at that balance sheet there, what that looks like. It's every time I do it with a client, I learn something and get amazed. And we do it, hundreds of times a year, and been doing this for 25 years. So I would say that one of the first things that anybody should want to do is sit down and have a present position built by their financial advisor and a future position built by their financial advisor. And that future position solely exists to see how long what you've accumulated will last.
Hey everyone, just a quick reminder that the Built to Finish podcast is brought to you by Accresis. Accresis have helped over 30 founders generate over $1 billion in wealth via strategic acquisitions or investor recapitalizations. If you're the owner of a middle market company and want to explore what a potential exit will look like for you so that you can finally realize the value of what you've been working so hard on, please do contact Accresis via the website accresis.com or hit me up on LinkedIn for more information at Stephen Pivnik. Now, back to the show. So this is an interesting area which I like to talk about lately. AI. What impact do you think AI is going to have in the financial planning industry and in the accounting industry in general? Just because you mentioned a lot of tax planning and tax planning strategies, and then actually filing taxes. How will AI impact any of the above?
Yeah, I mean, I've yet to meet anyone yet that likes to overpay on their taxes and actually sends in an extra check every year, right? So I think most of us, Americans want to pay our fair share, and that's great. But when it comes to sending in an extra check for charity, that's the last place I think that most people want to do it. But yeah, AI is an absolute fascinating space for me every single day. I'm actually becoming a student, of it. I'm very, like I said, a very curious person. But AI has the ability. I think it's read now 850 million books. It's scrubbed, so much data, that's out there around the world and the interwebs, and more is coming online. But as it relates to, wealth management and tax planning specifically, yeah, that landscape will be one of the landscapes that will be impacted probably the soonest. And that's because a code is a code that can be researched and it can be scrubbed and it can be a standardized, form, a mechanism of a 1040 or a Schedule E, Schedule F, or K1s or what have you. You can upload those into certain software programs and you can ask it questions about how to save money and what kind of efficiencies that, I can have with the right prompts and the right, scenarios. You can do a lot of tax planning yourself. I still think it makes sense for the time being to work alongside a family office or a boutique, planning firm that does tax strategy that can, help with all of that. But a lot of those firms, including our firm, we use a lot of different technologies and AI to do a lot of that stuff as well. And so it's valuable to work with somebody that's doing that. But you can also experiment it. You can redact your social security number, your name and your address in your 1040, black it out so that AI can't read it, upload, that into your favorite AI, whether that's, Chat or Claude or, what have you, and ask it the right prompts and the right questions. And I think most people would be amazed at what you will find. And so, sorry for all of the tax planners that are out there and for all of the CPAs and everything. It's still a relationship business for now. But I think in addition to a lot of, what I do as well with regards to the technical aspect of things, AI is going to have a significant impact, right? So,
All right. You've heard Jim's prediction right here on Built to Finish.
yeah.
But to all the accountants out there, maintain those relationships. AI is coming.
Yeah. And lawyers and doctors and right. Like there will be a significant, impacts to all kinds of industries. And so I don't think there'll be complete elimination. I believe in the American spirit. I believe, in humanity, and there will be something else that they will direct their knowledge, time, energy, and effort to. But most of what we're doing, right now and what we would call, white collar work will be severely impacted by AI. And I mean, severely, probably, realistically in the next 36 to 60 months, in that time frame. So get ready, everybody, would be the message I would say. Have a plan in place, get a present position built, get a future position built, and get a cash flowing strategy that will help you be immune to the impacts of, AI. And that's a big focus of what we're doing, Stephen, right now, is actually running financial plans through a stress test of what happens if you lose your job in 4 years. And how long can you last and what would you do? That's a conversation that we're having because we just don't believe that these jobs that most of us have are going to be, we're not getting laid off. They're being eliminated. And there's a big difference between something that's going to stop and just for a little while versus it's never coming back, right? So today, AI agents are making a huge run for, our jobs and all of that. And I think that's going to accelerate, down the road. So yeah, get ready, work with somebody that's thinking about that, work with a firm that has a plan in place to offset that. We are actively working really, really hard and diligently for the solution so that if your job is impacted in 36, 48, or 60 months, what mechanism do we have in place to provide a cash flow in place that we can start right away to replace that income. And I'm very happy to say we have a solution for most people. If you give us 3 years to 4 years in that time frame, and you're a $175,000 to $300,000 a year earner, we can replace that in that time frames. Cash flow is king, as it always is, and probably always will be.
That's an incredible viewpoint, and only time will tell, right? So we shall see, but it's good to hear that you have a solution for folks that may be threatened, whose career may be threatened by AI. So call Jim.
Yep.
All right, thanks. So present position, a lot of people use QuickBooks or a QuickBooks competitor, and all of these financial packages have, the asset tracker where you put in what your house is worth, what your stock portfolio is worth, your 401k, et cetera, et cetera. How is your present position report different from what I can get straight out of QuickBooks?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that one of the things that we do really, really well is we add in a lot of financial modeling in terms of adding in tax rates, from an effective tax percentage, and then also adding in an assumed inflation, adjuster into the overall, financial plan. And then we're also looking at market returns based off of the history of the actual account, right? So we want as accurate as a present position, as we possibly can. And we want to model that out, until the employment, income, if you will, whether it's dividends
Mhm.
from a K1 or, B2 income or what have you, is actually turned off. And Social Security then, becomes turned on, or, other assets. So it's very comprehensive. There's a lot that goes into, a present position to get it really accurate and really done right. And there makes no sense to talk about, a future position if you don't have the present position, really dialed in and really looking good.
Sure. So it sounds like it's significantly different from what you're going to get straight out of your financial program that you're using.
Yeah, yeah. At least for now, AI is everybody's is their nemesis, if you will. But yeah, it is for now something that's very important. It's the basis of everything. A lot of times we have investment opportunities, or we have alternative investments or different portfolios and different things that we can talk to people about. But oftentimes, if there's a difference between eligibility and suitability, you might have the cash to be able to do something, but it might not fit into your short-term or long-term overall financial, position until somebody understands, where you're currently at. So it kind of would be malpractice to bring, an investment to somebody that may or may not fit into their, short-term and long-term overall financial plan without having that present position built. So it could be a significant lost opportunity cost for somebody not having that built.
You mentioned malpractice. What's something widely accepted in wealth management today that you fundamentally disagree with?
I would say that well, there are five major money moves that we focus on, and they're probably spent. We spend a lot of time unwinding a lot of conventional wisdom out there, right? And so most of the time, financially, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pay off your home as fast as you possibly can. It's like driving down the highway of life with one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas. You're not really going, anywhere. And trying to pay down an asset is very different than saving money, in an asset, right? So paying down debt's not the same as making money. I know that sounds crazy, but they're different things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that we focus on, but we focus a lot on taxes. I think a lot of times, the financial planning, community just makes kind of the assumption that, hey, it's better for you to delay otherwise payable income tax dollars in the future. And so put as much money as you possibly can in a 401k. And once you get done with that, go ahead and do the IRA without looking at the future impact of those dollars that have not had the tax calculation, done yet, and the tax deferral really occurred. So there's some, big opportunity there for some education, for a lot of people. And then there are some unconventional financial products, tools in the tool bag, I like to say, that are misunderstood, as well. There are
Mm-hmm.
places for all of us, assuming we qualify and it makes sense, right? Where we can only make money, never lose money, and never pay any tax on the gain, the growth, and the transfer. So we spend a lot of time educating people there on those products when necessary, and a lot of alternative products as well that people don't understand how that would be woven into their safety, liquidity, rate of return, and overall tax portfolio. But it's a complicated world in the financial services space. But you definitely have to understand where someone's at first to be able to take them
Mm-hmm.
where it is that they want to go.
Agreed. Agreed. You mentioned alternatives and other financial products. How does one looking for a financial advisor tell the difference between somebody that's going to be truly strategic versus someone that's just going to sell them a bunch of products, off of their menu?
Yeah, that's obviously another great question. I always, if someone is trying to sell you, a product without knowing where you're currently at, run the other way. Always do your best to work with a fiduciary, somebody who's going to work in your best interest. That's not always a fail safe, but it's a good rule of thumb and a great practice. But somebody that's going to make a prescription without doing a diagnosis is probably somebody that you really don't want to work with. So if it's too quick into a financial product, or too quick into a portfolio, or too quick even into an alternative, without understanding your goals, without understanding your risk tolerances, without understanding, where you're at, how in the world can they do that? Stephen, it'd be like calling up your doctor and saying, I think I'm going to come in today around 2:00. Now, matter of fact, I don't want to come in. I just want you to send over, some pain medication. Send over some hydrocodone over to the pharmacy. Give me 10 pills or whatever, and I'm going to sweep over there and pick it up. And
Mm.
you might know what you want and you might know what you need, but I think the doctor would be like, whoa, 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 hold on. It doesn't work that way. You got to come in, you got to sit down, we got to look at what's going on, and then we can, together make a great recommendation for you. So I kind of call it like that doctor scenario, right? If you're going to
Sure.
work with somebody about something as important as your money, that you work so hard, for, and you've made the conscious decision, to save it and not spend it, which is, a big decision to save for the future, right? Make sure that you're working with somebody that understands, your goals, making sure somebody understands, where you're at, before they can make a prescription for what to sell you, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you're definitely qualified to make the proper prescriptions because you have extensive experience on both the asset side of the world as well as the debt side of the world. So, can you
Yeah.
just elaborate a little bit more on your background there?
Yeah, yeah. Now we're going to be talking about the gray hair, right? So the experience, a little bit, yeah, 25 years in financial services, right? And so I always like to kind of let people know when somebody asks, what is it you do? I really help people find money that's being transferred away unknowingly and unnecessarily, and then we use that money that we find through the financial planning, process, and then we repurpose that back to, the family's balance sheet, and then with that, we're able to grow it, safely and liquid, and probably a greater rate of return utilizing, tax efficiency. But yeah, my background is a little bit unique from that perspective. I spent time on the debt side of the first part of my career, on the M&A side, and raising money and doing debt and doing equity, and so very familiar. I've had a couple of really successful exits and had a couple that weren't so successful, and so I have the scars and the bruises and the cuts to
Th-
understand, what it's like
Those are
to.
just as important as the successful ones are.
Yeah, I agree. I've certainly learned more
Not at
from
the
the
time,
challenging
but
ones.
it's
Yeah.
important overall.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of fell into through my own, need and requirement, having a liquidity event, what do I do with this money and what's the best place for me to put it? And so I couldn't find a financial advisor that thought like me, that cared, like me. It's my own money. And I just said, hey, I'm going to get a little educated here. And the education just never stopped. And so I'm a curious person by nature. And so that led to one license, to another practice. And then people would reach out and say, I'd like to work with you. And next thing you know, I'm running a boutique, private client company where we sit down with people, understand where it is they're at and where it is that they want to go, and do our best to bring all of the knowledge to the family, thinking about it in terms of like, what is the impact of the debt to the company? What is the impact of the equity to the company? What is the impact of the debt and the equity to the family's balance sheet? And how does all of that, planning, that exit and the purpose of that exit and the number for that exit, right? So it's a lot easier to reverse engineer a kind of an exit or a number for a founder when you know what we're trying to achieve on the personal side, right? So
Right.
I think sometimes founders, and I've been guilty of this too, when I just get this number, if I just get to that number, all this is going to kind of fall in line. And, made the mistake myself in my first exit where I didn't have a lot of that planning. And I left as much as I made on the second exit on the table just in form of taxes due to the lack of planning. So I'm definitely speaking from experience, here, and I'm still writing off losses from the third exit that I didn't, that were a learning experience, right? So
Ouch.
when you make a bunch of money, you pay tax right away. When you lose, a bunch of money that you pay a little bit, you get to write off a little bit over the course of a long period of time. So it would go
Sure.
into the next couple of decades.
I hear you and I feel your pain. So
Yeah.
obviously it's a no-brainer for somebody that doesn't have a wealth manager to start a conversation with you and your firm way before an exit and obviously leading up to and after the exit. What if somebody listening is very satisfied with their current financial advisor? What value add can you provide to them?
Yes, a second set of eyes, a second set of ears, and a second brain is worth its weight, in absolute gold and platinum, right? Most of the people that, I have an opportunity to serve and visit, they have two advisors and two tax people and lots of professionals, in their lives, already. And that's great. And I'm thankful that people have taken that level of care and responsibility with their finances and resources. And I think it's wonderful. But I would say that every now and then it doesn't hurt, to have a second opinion just to make sure that things are going good. Not necessarily to cause any issues or put any chinks, in anything that's going on, but just to make sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted and things are going really well as efficient, as possible. I recently had a scenario where that exactly happened. And through the planning process, we found about $9.4 million that was being transferred away unknowingly and unnecessarily to
Wow.
very good, advisors, very good tax planner, but they just missed one little thing. And that little thing ended up being a big thing. And so then they ended up having now a third advisor, which is us kind of coming in and doing what we do. And so, yeah, it never hurts to get a second opinion. And most fiduciaries won't agree to work with anybody anyway until they know what their present position is. And so, doesn't hurt to sit down and give your information to somebody and see where you're at just to make sure you're good to go.
Yep. Agreed. Never hurts. So my new favorite section of every episode is the rapid fire questions. Ready?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go.
Just 5. Biggest financial mistake founders make.
Not planning.
Most overlooked tax strategy.
Too much money in qualified accounts.
One thing to do 5 years before an exit.
Get a plan in place.
One thing to avoid 1 year after an exit.
Not having the future plan in place.
Best definition of true wealth.
Ooh, hopefully that's the last one.
It is.
True wealth, yeah, it for me is measured in the man or woman in the mirror. They are happy with themselves. They love themselves. They appreciate themselves, and they realize that their life is an absolute gift, and they were here to serve others. And they have a tremendous relationship with their loved one, or their spouse, or their partner. They have a great relationship with their kids and their kids' kids and people in their community. And that is a really successful life. Every 90-year-old I've ever had the opportunity to work with, looking back on their life, it was never measured by the square footage of their house, the cars that they drove, or the size of the yacht, or the fuel bill that they're having in their jet. It was really genuinely the relationships that they were able to foster and nurture along the way. There's no U-Haul behind the hearse. So we're not taking any of it with us, right? And it always costs money to sleep indoors, right? So no one gets away from that either. But yeah, true success is loving and serving and having great people in your life and having a great family life while you're climbing the ladder and working on stacking up chips.
I love it. Very, very well said. I've had chills through the last couple of moments while you were sharing that. Thank you. Jim, you are a wealth of knowledge on the topic of wealth. How do folks get a hold of you and reach out, and how do they get more information about the private client company?
Yeah, best thing to do is head over to the privateclientcompany.com and also go to jimstryker.info. We do a lot of educational webinars there. We have some courses that we have, but also welcome emails as well. So that's just very simple, jim@theprivateclientcompany.com. Shoot us an email if you have any questions or anything you want to that we touched on here that we can dive into. We're here to help everybody. Thank you for having us. This was great.
No, you're very welcome. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for having me.
You bet. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Built to Finish. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe. It helps the show tremendously. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it with somebody in your network that you think would benefit from Jim's advice. Thank you very much for tuning in. And until next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Accresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.